Dear students, in this unit, we are going to discuss the significance of the porter's scene in Shakespeare's Macbeth. And this is a very important scene in the entire play, along with the banquet scene and the sleepwalking scene in Macbeth. The porter's scene in Macbeth happens in Act 2, Scene 3 of Shakespeare's play. And this scene serves as a crucial moment of comic relief in an otherwise dark and intense tragedy. Here we are going to discuss how the porter's scene provides comic relief, allowing the audience a moment to process the horror of Duncan's murder as it contrasts sharply with the somber tone of preceding scenes, making the surrounding darkness feel even darker by comparison. It serves as a moral commentary on Macbeth's actions, with the porter imagining himself as the gatekeeper of hell, welcoming sinners, which reinforces the idea that Macbeth's castle has become a hellish place following the regicide. The scene acts as a practical device, giving Macbeth time to wash the blood from his hands and compose himself before confronting Macduff. And we shall also going to look in this unit that how the use of prose in porter's scene contrasts sharply with the elevated verse of noble characters, grounding the play in reality and highlighting the theme of appearance and reality, as the porter's earthy humor provides a stark contrast to the dark atmosphere surrounding Duncan's murder. So the porter's character serves to humanize Macbeth by forcing the audience to recognize their own humanity in both characters, as the porter's remarks about drink and lechery metaphorically relate to Macbeth's struggles with ambition and moral decay. Coming immediately after the murder of King Duncan, this brief interlude featuring the drunken porter of Macbeth's castle may seem out of place at first glance. However, upon closer examination, we see the porter's scene proves to be a masterful dramatic device that enhances the play's themes and atmosphere in several important ways. First and foremost, the porter's scene provides a moment of levity and humor that offers the audience a temporary respite from the mounting tension and horrors of the main plot. The drunken porter's rambling monologue, filled with bawdy jokes and wordplay, stand in stark contrast to the somber tone of the preceding scenes. So this abrupt tonal shift serves multiple purposes. It allows the audience a chance to process the shocking events they have just witnessed, while also heightening the dramatic impact when the play returns to its tragic trajectory. The comic interlude making the surrounding darkness feel even darker by comparison. And here we can see by the introduction of the comic relief in a tragedy, Shakespeare has also violated the tenets as, for example, prescribed by Aristotle in his book Poetics. The intermingling of tragedy and comedy is something that the Greek master warned us against. But here we see that the Renaissance approach to drama was undergoing a societal shift. So Shakespeare has also introduced an element of comic relief as a kind of thematic device. Beyond its function as a comic relief, the Porter's scene in Macbeth is rich with symbolism and thematic resonance that ties into the larger concerns of the play. The Porter imagines himself as the gatekeeper of hell, welcoming various sinners who knock at the gate. This infernal imagery reinforces the sense that Macbeth's castle has become a hellish place in the wake of Duncan's murder. The Porter's musings on the types of people who'd go to hell, including equivocators, thieves, and traitors, all apply to Macbeth himself, who has just committed regicide. In this way, the scene serves as a moral commentary on Macbeth's actions. Shakespeare was an extraordinary genius, possessing a multitude of perspectives that could navigate all levels of human experience. The character of the drunken porter, with his rowdy and coarse language, is portrayed as an ordinary person typical of those who serve their superiors. Under the influence of alcohol, such individuals often reveal truths about hidden events. The porter's seemingly innocent words carry deeper meanings for the audience. Although he may seem insignificant, he holds the keys to the castle's main gate, indicating a level of trustworthiness. He guards the entrance to Inverness Castle, which had been compared to heaven because of its serene environment and gentle air. However, we see that the noble Macbeth, lord of the castle, has turned this heaven into hell by committing the terrible crime of murdering the King of Scotland, his esteemed guest. Shakespeare uses the porter to unknowingly express simple truths, making him a revealer of the true state of affairs within the castle. According to the critic Frederick B. Tromley, the relationship between Macbeth and Porter is not one of contrast, as traditionally interpreted, but rather one of similarity, where the porter serves as a metaphor for Macbeth. So this critic, Tromley, argues that the porter's significance lies in his ability to humanize Macbeth by forcing the audience to recognize their own humanity in both characters. He states, the ultimate function of the scene is to humanize the murderer by forcing us to recognize him in the ordinary porter and perhaps in ourselves as well. So the porter's entrance immediately after Macbeth's anguished cry creates a bitterly ironic atmosphere, suggesting that both characters share a sense of moral confusion and disorientation. Tromley emphasizes that the porter's remarks about drink and lechery metaphorically relate to Macbeth's struggles with ambition and moral decay. As he notes, drink may be said to be an equivocator with lechery. So paralleling Macbeth's own equivocations with good and evil. So ultimately, the porter embodies the comic and the familiar, which serves to remind the audience of the startling proximity of the criminal and the comic in Macbeth's character. A.C. Bradley, one of the most famous critics of Shakespeare, aptly points out that Shakespeare has contrived the Porter's comic speeches with great skill, and they are not comic enough to allow one to forget for a moment what has preceded and what must follow. So here in the speech of A.C. Bradley, we can see the justification of the insertion of the comic episode, though this comic episode is a violation of the classical kind of rules. So De Quincey, in his famous essay on the knocking at the gate in Macbeth, observes that this episode increases retrospectively the power of the preceding scene. We have been living in a dark, evil, and gruesome world, and with the appearance of the Porter, the pulses of life are beginning to beat again. And the re-establishment of the goings on of the world makes us profoundly sensible of the awful parenthesis that has suspended them. The fifth commandment of the Bible, thou shalt not kill, and the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods, they start blazing their lights to boom out to the local world the murderous happenings within the castle. So while Shakespeare often writes about royalty, nobility, and supernatural themes, he frequently connects with the common people. In Macbeth, the character of Porter represents the voice of the ordinary person's conscience, speaking timeless truths. Through the Porter's humor, we can see that Shakespeare tries to show us, ironically, the kind of topsy-turvy world of Macbeth. As we read, we navigate through the intense emotions crafted by a master dramatist. We understand that here in this play, Macbeth, who is a kind of noble hero, has sacrificed his soul and integrity to evil. There is a constant knocking at the castle's main gate in this scene, and that symbolizes the approach of truth and justice to cleanse the scene of corruption. The drunken Porter stumbles in, holding keys, and serves as Shakespeare's voice, likening himself to the gatekeeper of hell. He is ready to let in early visitors, whom he sees as sinners entering hell. However, we realize that their sins are minor compared to the grave sins of those inside the castle. The Porter, in a drunken state, rambles about various characters such as a farmer, a tailor, and an equivocator. So he also talks randomly about lechery, describing how a man behaves under its influence. He notices the rooster crowing, indicating it is 3 o'clock. His speech is sometimes vulgar, promoting a desire to skip parts, yet it contains truths that make us pause and wonder what Shakespeare will present next. There is a loud knocking, and the Porter responds in the name of Beelzebub, imagining himself as the gatekeeper of hell. He then envisions a farmer entering, whom he considers as a sinner. So this refers to a contemporary joke about a farmer who hoarded corn to profit during a famine, but hanged himself when a good harvest led to low prices. The Porter, in his drunkenness, imagines this farmer needing many napkins to wipe away sweat in hell. So here we can see there is a topical reference in this particular episode. And more knocks follow, and the Porter thinks an equivocator has arrived. The doctrine of equivocation associated with Henry Garnet during his trial for the gunpowder plot in 1606 allowed someone to provide contradicting answers under oath without breaking their oath. So in Act 5, Scene 5, Macbeth realizes, though too late, that equivocation is an instrument of the devil. So that is the anagnorectic moment, the moment of revelation. Macbeth realizes, but too late, that equivocation is a devilish tool. So there we see that how Shakespeare has used the Porter scene as a thematic necessity to drive home the important points. So it is not just a kind of stopgap scene. It's a very important one in terms of its thematic point of view. So the Porter's words reflect the public's distaste for this doctrine. The Porter swears in the name of another devil. Another knocking follows, and he imagines he opens the gate to an English tailor who, he remarks, was tempted into theft by the bagginess of the first kind of French horse, or showed unusual cleverness by pilfering out of the narrow second kind. So all the characters that appear before the Porter seem to be the very embodiments of topical allusions, some of which help to fix the date of the play's composition, that is, in 1606. The Porter says that the tailor's smoothing iron, also known as the goose, could well be roasted. So great is the hell that is the Inverness Castle. Again there is more knocking, and Porter shuffles to the right door to lift chains and draw bolts, and for a short time all the gate stands open. We are made aware of a cold blustering wind blowing outside the castle. It creeps in, making the Porter feel cold, and he instantly announces that he will no longer devil Porter. Okay, so here the scene actually ends. So at last when the haze of intoxication is over, so he tells that he is sure that he has let in a lot of people from all kinds of profession who prefer the easy and tempting road leading to damnation. So here in this scene we can see that this is an echo from Shakespeare's own Hamlet, where Ophelia contrasts the steep and thorny way to heaven with the primrose path of dalliance. So thus we see that the Porter's scene in Macbeth is very important from the thematic point of view. Shakespeare has in one short stroke shown to us in this scene that there is an inner state in each man which operates on the dictates of a higher order. It is intelligent and all-knowing. This moral order is no respecter of caste, creed, lineage, beauty, or wealth. It panders to none and walks on straight, steady, and unalterable paths. Its scales of justice are ever correct, and in silent ways walks through its chosen instrument. It makes characters realize through all their ambitious self-will that judgment always awaits us in this world. In that we teach others to do equally bloody deeds, and since we may suffer from these deeds, we are punished by our own example. The simple drunk Porter utters Shakespeare's many truths and is quite an informative person. In spite of his commonplaceness, we see that his vulgarity and pathetic fumblings, we find him unique, a kind of its own type, wonderfully sketched. We remember him with a chuckle that he is a real person from a tribe of hard-drinking men who keep their souls in the right place. in spite of their misdemeanors. So, we have so far discussed the thematic necessity of the Porter's sin. Now we shall look at the dramatic purpose of this comic scene. And the dramatic purpose of this comic scene lies in its practical kind of use. Because we realize that when Macbeth was stealing into Duncan's room, there was carousing below on the ground floor. The scene gives time to Macbeth to wash blood from his hands after his murderous deed. He also gets time to get into a fresh nightgown and compose his agitated senses to reappear natural so that he can conduct Macduff to the king's chamber with apparent innocence. Moreover, the Porter's sin serves as a bridge between the murder of Duncan and the discovery of his body. So, it transitions the audience from the secretive nighttime murder to the chaotic aftermath. The porter's delay in answering the knocking at the gate allows tension to build, and his eventual opening of the door symbolizes the opening of the castle to the outside world and the inevitable exposure of Macbeth's crime. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are directly contrasted with the porter. The porter uses drink to make himself merry, where Macbeth and his wife use drink to stupefy the king's two servants and also to harden and brazen themselves to commit the dastardly murder. So here we can see that the drink acts as an equivocator which leads one on and departs to dishearten finally. The porter's scene in Macbeth also highlights the theme of appearance versus reality, a recurring motif in Macbeth. The porter's feigned role as the gatekeeper of hell mirrors the deceptive facades that characters maintain throughout the play. Just as the porter pretends to be something he is not, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth present false fronts to hide their true intentions. The theme is further emphasized by the porter's drunken state, which blurs the line between reality and illusion. So his inability to distinguish between the two mirrors Macbeth's own descent into madness, where he can no longer discern the boundaries between his ambition and consequence. So his inability to distinguish between the two mirrors Macbeth's own descent into madness, where he can no longer discern the boundaries between his ambition and his conscience. Shakespeare's use of prose in the porter's scene of Macbeth is also an important departure, because it is a departure from the play's otherwise predominantly blank verse structure. So this change serves specific purposes, including providing comic relief and offering social commentary. Firstly, the use of prose in this scene is highly significant because it contrasts sharply with the elevated verse used by the noble characters. The porter, a minor character, speaks in prose, which is often used by Shakespeare to depict lower status or common folk. So this choice immediately sets the scene apart, signaling a shift in tone and focus. The porter's speech is earthy, humorous, and laden with body references, which provide a stark contrast to the dark and tense atmosphere surrounding Duncan's murder. The prose also serves to ground the play in reality, while the supernatural elements and the psychological unraveling of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth create a certain distance from everyday life. The porter's scene brings the audience back to a more relatable human experience. His humorous complaints about the effects of alcohol and his interactions with Macduff and Lennox introduce a slice of normalcy amidst the chaos of the unfolding tragedy. The Porter's prose is not just a marker of class distinction. It also allows for a different kind of expression. While the verse in Macbeth is often dense with metaphor and complex imagery, the Porter's language is direct, colloquial, and full of body humor. He speaks of the nose painting, sleep, and makes lewd jokes about the effects of alcohol on the kind of performance. So, this earthy bodily language stands in stark contrast to the abstract and often spiritual concerns expressed in the surrounding scenes. Moreover, the content of the Porter's speech provides a jarring counterpart to the high drama of Duncan's murder. While Macbeth and Lady Macbeth speak of ambition, fate, and the weight of their actions, the Porter is concerned with the mundane matters like the previous night's drinking. So this contrast in subject matter, emphasized by the linguistic shift, also serves to accentuate or heighten the tragedy of the entire play by juxtaposing everyday with the extraordinary. The Porter's scene in Shakespeare's Macbeth is also a masterful example of dramatic irony, where the audience knows more about the situation than the characters on stage. So this scene, coming immediately after Macbeth's murder of King Duncan, is rich with ironic undertones that heighten the tension and deepen the tragedy of the play. The most obvious use of dramatic irony stems from the Porter's ignorance of the murder that has just taken place. As he stumbles drunkenly to answer the knocking at the gate, he imagines himself as the porter of Hell's Gate. He says if a man were porter of Hell's Gate, he should have hold turning the key. So this irony here is twofold. First, the audience knows that a terrible deed has indeed transformed Macbeth's castle into a kind of hell on earth, though the porter is unaware of the second. So, next we can see that by answering the gate, the porter is unwittingly allowing in those who will discover Duncan's murder, setting in motion the unraveling of Macbeth's plans. The porter's musings about the types of people who would be knocking at Hell's Gate are laden with dramatic irony. He imagines admitting a farmer who hanged himself on the expectation of plenty, an equivocator that could swear in the both scales against either scale, and an English tailor who stole from a French horse. So each of these imagined sinners parallels aspects of Macbeth's characters and actions in ways the porter does not realize, but the audience can appreciate. The farmer who hanged himself mirrors Macbeth's own expectation of plenty, the crown which will lead to his downfall. The equivocator represents Macbeth's duplicity, saying one thing while meaning another, particularly in his interactions with Duncan. The tailor who steals reflects how Macbeth has stolen the crown through murder. So these parallels create a rich layer of dramatic irony as the porter unknowingly comments on the very crime that has just been committed. When the porter says, "I pray you remember the porter," he is asking for a tip, but his words taken on an ironic double meaning. The audience, knowing what has transpired, they might interpret this as a plea to remember this scene and its significance. The porter, a lowly character, becomes an unwitting commentator on the grand tragedy unfolding around him. The porter's discussion of the effects of alcohol provides another layer of dramatic irony. He says that drink provokes the desire, but it takes away the performance. This can be seen as an ironic commentary on Macbeth's situation. His desire for power has been provoked, but his ability to enjoy that power or rule effectively will be taken away by the very act that wins him the crown. When Macduff and Lennox enter, the dramatic irony intensifies. Their casual conversation with the porter about the previous night's revelry stands in stark contrast to the audience's knowledge of the night's true events. Macduff asks, "Is thy master stirring?" So the irony here is palpable, as the audience knows that Macbeth is indeed stirring, not from sleep, but from the act of murder. The porter's body jokes about the effects of drink on sexual performance carry an undercurrent of irony. He says drink makes him, and it mars him, and it sets him on, and it takes him off. It pursues him and disheartens him, makes him stand to and not stand to. So this could be seen as an ironic commentary on Macbeth's actions. His ambition has made him king, but will ultimately mar him. It has set him on the path to power, but will take him off the same path. When Macbeth enters the scene, the dramatic irony reaches its peak. His exchanges with Macduff and Lennox are filled with double meanings that the audience, but not the other characters, can appreciate. When Lennox comments on the unruly night, saying, "The night has been unruly where we lay. Our chimneys were blown down." So there we see that Macbeth responds, "It was a rough night." The audience knows just how rough the night truly was, adding a layer of dark irony to this seemingly innocuous exchange. Macbeth's response to the news of Duncan's murder is perhaps the most irony-laden moment in this scene. His feigned shock and outrage are painfully ironic to the audience who knows the truth. When he says, "Had I but died an hour before this chance, I had lived a blessed time," the irony is almost unbearable. The audience knows that an hour before, Macbeth was in the act of murdering Duncan. The porter's scene also serves as an ironic counterpoint to the surrounding scenes of high tragedy. Its low comedy and earthly concerns stand in stark contrast to the momentous events that have just occurred and are about to unfold. The juxtaposition creates a form of structural irony, highlighting the gap between the mundane world, represented by the porter, and the world of power and consequence, inhabited by the main characters. The repeated knocking that punctuates the scene adds to the sense of dramatic irony. For the porter, it's merely an annoyance interrupting his sleep. For Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, as we have seen in the previous scene, it's a terrifying sound that seems to echo their guilty conscience. For the audience, knowing what the characters do not, each knock builds tension and anticipation for the inevitable discovery of the crime. Even the porter's occupation itself carries ironic weight. As the gatekeeper, he should be protecting the castle from intruders. Ironically, the true threat has come from within in the form of the castle's master, Macbeth. So, Shakespeare's use of dramatic irony in this scene serves multiple purposes. It provides a moment of comic relief, allowing the audience to release some of the tension built up by the murder scene. However, this relief is undercut by the constant reminders of the horror that has just occurred, creating a complex emotional experience for the audience. The irony also serves to deepen the tragedy. By contrasting the porter's ignorance with the audience's knowledge, Shakespeare highlights the kind of sense of the tragedy. It also accentuates the terrible secret Macbeth is carrying. The light-hearted tone of much of the scene makes the underlying tragedy all the more poignant. Furthermore, the dramatic irony in this scene foreshadows the larger irony that will play out over the course of the play. Macbeth's action intended to bring him power and security will ultimately lead to his downfall. The porter's unwitting commentary on sin, damnation, and equivocation prefigures the moral and psychological struggles Macbeth will face. Thus, Shakespeare's use of dramatic irony in the porter's scene of Macbeth is a testament to his skill as a dramatist. Through this device, he creates a scene that operates on multiple levels simultaneously, as comic relief, as commentary on the main action, and as foreshadowing of themes to come. The dramatic irony enriches the audience's experience, accentuates the tragedy, and adds layers of meaning to what might otherwise be a simple transitional scene. It's a brilliant example of how Shakespeare could infuse even a seemingly minor scene with profound significance, using the gap between appearance and reality to explore the play's central themes of deception, guilt, and the corrupting influence of unchecked ambition. In conclusion, we can say the porter's scene in Macbeth is far more than a simple comic interlude. It serves as a brilliantly crafted device that provides comic relief, reinforces key themes, and offers a kind of symbolic commentary on the main events, creates dramatic irony, and enhances the overall structure and placing of the play. So its significance lies not just in its humorous content, but in how it interacts with and enriches the tragic elements of Shakespeare's masterpiece. The porter's scene demonstrates Shakespeare's unparalleled skill in weaving together disparate tones and styles to create a complex, multi-layered, and theatrical experience. Now we are going to discuss the important topics from the unit. First, you should look at the way that how does the porter's scene in Macbeth serve as a moment of comic relief, and what effect does this have on the audience's perception of the surrounding darkness. Secondly, you should also look that in what ways does the character of the porter symbolize the moral decay within Macbeth's castle, particularly in relation to his role as the gatekeeper of hell. The third topic important from this unit is how does Shakespeare's use of prose in the porter's scene contrast with the elevated verse used by the noble characters, and what purpose does this have in grounding the play in reality. Fourth, what thematic connections can be drawn between the porter's drunken ramblings and Macbeth's own descent into madness, especially regarding the concepts of appearance and reality. And last but not the least, how does the porter's scene function as a bridge between the murder of Duncan and the discovery of his body, and what dramatic purpose does this serve in the overall structure of the play? Thank you.